Let me tell you about what it's like to get chickenpox when you're in your 20s, okay? It starts with just one tiny mark. For me, that stupid little bump, looking more or less the same as a zit, sat on the corner of my mouth, which, being the idiot that I am, I thoughtlessly picked at, and suddenly I had these awful spots all over. The disease goes away after a few weeks, but not before, completely ravaging your skin. A month after the outbreak, my entire face was riddled with awful, angry scars, and the first few days of being out of the house were just so hard. I'm not great looking, but I've never felt this ugly before. And everyone tells you, oh, yeah, don't worry, chickenpox don't leave scars. But the marks don't seem to be going away. I feel really self-conscious about them, like a teenager who's going through their first major acne eruption. Except at my age, it's just so lame to admit that I'm experiencing this kind of insecurity about my appearance. If we're being honest though, I think some of us never truly got past the insecurities of our youth. We just learned to literally mask them with makeup. This includes men. And by the way, it's awesome that men are embracing makeup, but this is a whole other topic, and I would probably need to get my Jonathan Van Ness on before I can start talking about that. Anyway, that made me think about how often we say that makeup can be a tool of empowerment. Is it really true for all people, or are we just using makeup to bury our negative self-image under layer upon layer of foundation? This is Some Scuffs, a podcast about navigating the perils of our complicated and confusing social world. My name is Devel Lee. It sounds stupid, but I think we all just want to be pretty. Having a beautiful face is socially significant. Studies have shown that facial attractiveness influences the subjective evaluation of a person's overall physical attractiveness and social desirability, more so than bodily attractiveness does. The theory goes that rosy cheeks and clear skin signal that a woman is youthful and in good health, so men evolved to look out for such traits in their partners. Women also supposedly look out for superficial traits, but these aren't tied to specific facial features. And so the theory suggests that women want tools that enhance the way their faces look, because, of course, everything we do is motivated by our desire to snag a man. If it isn't obvious enough, I cannot get behind this reductionist school of thought. I believe our motivations for wanting to look good run a lot deeper and are more complex than just sex. Still, the mating theory remains one of the central tenets in evolutionary psychology, so it's worth discussing. According to researchers, there are two opposite functions of makeup. One is seduction, which is intended to please others, used by women with higher self-esteem, extroversion, and assertiveness. The other is camouflage, which is to decrease a negative self-perception. This function is used by those with lower self-esteem, higher neuroticism, and anxiety. When used as camouflage, makeup's primary purpose is to disguise insecurity and in doing so, stem it.
I've heard of extreme cases of girls who their boyfriends have never seen what they look like without makeup, and they're doing the whole 5 o'clock thing, okay, he's asleep, let me remove my makeup, wakes up at 5 a.m. to put it back on, goes back to pretend sleep, and wake up and it's yes, I look like this.
That is insane.
It's insane, but that's those are some major self-esteem issues.
That is my friend Christian Maragnon, a makeup artist and hairstylist who's been in the industry for a decade. He's done work for magazines like Female, Her World, Esquire, and August Man, as well as big commercial campaigns like a year-long stint with Sephora. On the side, he also does bridal makeup. I thought he'd be the perfect person to speak to about this subject.
Can I just ask if the boys are stupid enough to just accept that that's their natural face?
I can't speak for all boys, but what I'm picking up here in Singapore is that guys here definitely prefer their women to not wear a lot, but they also don't know when they are wearing a lot. And I can't tell you how many times my guy friends show me pictures why can't they just do something like this? I'm like, boy, that's a full face of makeup. Just because she's got a nice natural layer of foundation and she's wearing neutral colors and a neutral lip, they're like, yeah, she's not wearing makeup. I'm like, no. So guys, don't talk about makeup if you don't know anything about it.
Where general male ignorance and the bareface movement coincide, Singapore was perhaps ahead of our American counterparts in making the quote-unquote progressive leap towards #no makeup. Whereas it took the indomitable Alicia Keys to rouse young Americans into laying down their glitter eyeshadow palettes and blazing purple lip crayons in 2016, Asians have been at it for years. And by that, I don't mean that we forgo makeup. Because the pressure to possess smooth, flawless skin is ever present, the trend necessitates that women recreate a natural no-makeup look with makeup. But when the use of makeup is tinged with deceit, it feels dirty, like we're cheating our way to being better liked. So we need to be clear that there's nothing intrinsically wrong or dishonest about wanting to enhance the way we look. Putting on an item of jewelry or combing your hair before you leave the house achieves the same effect, and we don't need to shame anybody for wanting to use makeup to do that. Makeup is meant to be empowering. But what about when you use it to dramatically change your facial structure?
For me, putting makeup on a regular person who's just looking to do a makeover or bridal work, it's about making them look their best and enhancing the features, right? And I want to really highlight that it's enhancing the features and not creating non-existent features. I feel like this Instagram makeup craze has made everyone look the same. Everyone looks like a version of Kylie Jenner, and it's crazy. And everyone has a gigantic strobe of highlight on their cheekbones.
Chris absolutely will not endorse this look.
I don't contour someone who doesn't have cheekbones at all. It just doesn't look right.
Who of us hasn't experimented with makeup to carve out cheekbones, chisel out a nose bridge, or lengthen their lashes? It can be exciting to be able to see yourself transformed by your own hand. And it can be empowering too. Until you realize you can't do without this new look, like those girls who wake up at 5 a.m. to put their faces on. I wanted to address issues around makeup and the meaning of beauty when I approached Chris for this episode. Before we spoke, I had been focusing on dealing with physical insecurities and battling self-doubt because of blemishes or particular facial features. It seems straightforward enough to tell the story from the perspective of someone wrestling with chickenpox scars for a couple of months. But then Chris shared his personal story with me and the entire discussion shifted. He fought a battle growing up that had to do with not a blemish, but the color of his skin, and his experience highlights a problem with defining beauty in the context of a multi-ethnic global community that we don't talk about enough. I should begin by saying that skin color preference is not backed by evolutionary psychological theory. It's a purely cultural construct that is historically rooted in Asian civilizations. Particularly in China, India, and Japan, darker-skinned individuals were associated with hard labor and long hours under the sun. Light skin meant you were probably born into nobility and therefore were more desirable. Years on, the preference for lighter skin was reinforced by colonialism. I'm basically the archetype of a petite Chinese girl. I'm pale as a sheet, and so I fit in here in Singapore. Chris isn't Chinese and he's not light-skinned like me. And over here, when you aren't yellow, you naturally stand out.
It's hard for me to understand because I grew up in the States, and in terms of the color of my skin, everybody wanted to be tan like me. You know, when you're from Arizona, everyone wants to be tan. And then I come here, and secondary school was rough because they're like, you're really dark. I was really, really getting stupid questions like, you're not from America, like you're not white. But, you know, I was born there, and I obviously have an Asian exterior. I get mistaken most of the time for Malay because I'm not dark. Like, I feel like people's thought process sometimes is, he's not that dark, so he can't be Indian, but he's obviously not Chinese, so he must be Malay.
For the record, he's a beautiful hybrid of Filipino and Indian blood, but the other kids were not interested in his ethnic roots. They just wanted to make sure that he knew he wasn't like them.
And it definitely affected my self-esteem, and I didn't, like myself at that age. And I was doing a lot of really stupid things that I look back and I'm like, I wish I had respect for myself because I wouldn't have done those things, like try to whiten my skin.
The feeling of being an outsider planted those first seeds of discontentment in Chris towards his skin color and outer appearance. I'm familiar with the term Chinese privilege. When issues of discrimination arise, I, the enlightened social justice warrior, use it to brand others who oppose me in the fight against institutional racism. The thing about privilege is that it's often a position that we occupy without quite realizing it. We're comfortably cocooned in it, with little or no exposure to what it's like to be without. 70% of Singapore's population looks like me. I've never been made to feel other, different, or out of place, at least not on the basis of my looks. And naively, I always assumed that colorism and racism at large were a problem that existed elsewhere, not in Singapore. Maybe a couple of dumb kids here and there still parrot racial slurs of the generations past, but surely most of civil society has moved beyond viewing the world through this lens of race. Chris painted a very different picture for me. His problems followed him into tertiary education, where he studied hairdressing.
It wasn't the plan. The plan wasn't to be a hairdresser. But I also didn't really have a lot of options given the way education here is structured.
Because he didn't do so great in secondary school, hairdressing was one of the few courses he could take. And he had his reservations.
My only experience with hairdressing before that was that my mother, so I'm very close with my mom, but she doesn't have a daughter. She's only got like 2 sons. I was the more domesticated one. I was the one doing housework with her, and I guess doing all the things that you probably would have asked your daughter to do, which includes like, Chris, tie my hair in a French braid, and she would teach me how. And that was probably my first experience with hair, was braids. I think she knew like maybe only 3 different kinds of braids, but I was doing those from a very young age.
Years of pleating his mom's hair gave Chris nimble fingers, so he breezed through the dexterity tests for admission into hairdressing school.
So I got in and I started loving it even more than I initially had, because I was like, wow, I'm good at this. Like, there's something I'm good at, and I'm not normally good at a lot of things. Particularly, I was very good with hairstyling, and it's kind of like architecture in a sense, because you're constructing something from the bottom up, and you have to have a good base, a good sturdy base, and that's how you learn to create all these avant-garde style, or something more simple like an updo. Eventually, after a couple of months, my lecturer noticed that I was particularly good with the styling aspect of it, and he actually sent me out on a job. I wasn't paid, but I got to assist another hairstylist for a show, and that was like my first show. And it was for the Hublot watches, and they had a private dinner / showcase by invite only, and they had 6 models. And
Chris's job was to help the hairstylist Ash curl the model's hair before he came in and styled it.
And I was excited, I was nervous. I did a lot of observing of how he would mold the hair into like different styles, and I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. I wanted to just go out there and freelance on my own, but I didn't understand the industry enough to go and do that. So after I graduated, I did go into a salon, and that was probably the worst experience ever. So a little thing you should know about me is I can actually understand quite a lot of Mandarin. Growing up with a lot of Chinese friends, so when you hear it every day, you pick it up, and eventually I could speak conversational Mandarin. But I didn't like to tell a lot of people that because I felt like this was kind of an advantage for me. So for 3 years in this salon, I never once told any of my colleagues that I could understand. I was hearing the kind of things they were saying about me. They're like, oh, he's so arrogant.
I didn't want to tell Chris this, but I'd heard another makeup artist tell a colleague that Chris was unfriendly and stuck up when his back was turned too. She said, he doesn't even bother to say hello. But the thing is, they were always speaking in Chinese amongst themselves. I couldn't see how he'd have been able to insert himself into the conversation without seeming rude. Anyway, Chris thinks his boss at the salon had a problem with the way he sounded.
Like, I obviously speak with an accent, and I'd hear him in the back. Like, he once like just said it really loud. He's like, I don't need someone speaking bombastic English in the salon. And I just didn't get why he hated that. And other assistants were given more opportunities than I was. And unfortunately, it was something that my lecturer did tell me very early on in hairdressing school, is that you're good, but you're going to have the hardest time of all. And I said, but why? And he was like, because you're not Chinese, you know. And I was like, I didn't realize that was a thing.
Fortunately, not everybody was unkind to Chris. A few of his colleagues took him under their wings and shared their knowledge and skills with him. Still, these are strong allegations Chris is making. I wondered if the color of his skin was really concomitant with the language he spoke and the accent it carried in eliciting such a strong and negative reaction from others. There, I caught myself putting the onus on him for being different from them, blaming the victim in some way. If you asked any of his ex-colleagues to explain why they didn't like him, I doubt they'd know the answer either. That's how implicit bias creeps in. When somebody is different, every characteristic, every personality trait, and physical feature that is alien to you coagulates into a giant mass of discomfort in your gut. And once enough of it builds up, you retch it up and unleash it on that person. You might not give it a name, but others would call it racism. Chris tolerated his coworkers' discomfort and bile for 5 years.
Eventually, I struck up the courage to quit, and I left quite dramatically. Says, you know what, I'm done. Fuck you and fuck you. And I left.
Did you say those exact words?
Yeah, I did. I did. And I knew there was no turning back. It was scary, but I also felt like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. And then I had absolutely no idea what to do next.
He spent some time bartending before doing a short stint at a blow-dry bar and then eventually scoring a gig as a bridal hairstylist with Marie So of 27A. She taught him how to do makeup, and his career thrived.
I am privileged because I got to skip a couple steps because I was tagging along under her spotlight. I'm very grateful for that. I was getting jobs, and eventually I was like, okay, you know what, I'm ready to branch out, I'm ready to do my own thing, I'm ready to go out there.
So, finally, Chris took the plunge and started freelancing. Before he knew it, he was getting big commercial and editorial gigs on his own.
And I'm very lucky to have had friends who knew I was good and wanted to help me out and saw potential and help me in terms of exposure. And that's why I am where I am now. I'm pretty comfortable with where I am in life. Makeup is fun in the sense that it's a form of expression. What I'm trying to advocate is that you should wear your makeup the way that you wear your clothes. And you shouldn't wear a look because it's on trend, because then the look wears you. I want you to wear makeup in a style that makes you feel good about yourself. And it should never be about relying on it, because at the end of the day, you go home and you take it off. But when you wear it, it's supposed to just give you that extra ounce of confidence and feel good. You should never be wearing makeup for someone. You should be doing it for yourself because you want to feel like this on that day.
This application of makeup demonstrates how it is fundamentally a creative act that shouldn't be constrained by trends or rules. Yet, we're limited by our own bodies and by our skin. Or at least it feels like we are. We're not perfectly formed, certainly not what we envision as perfect and whole and beautiful. But what is perfect anyway? Chris scoffs at the notion of such an ideal.
This mold that everyone is trying to fit in, you have to be this size, you have to have perfect aligned teeth. I just don't get it, and I detest it, because the things that I find attractive or I find interesting are the things that break that mold. Like someone with crooked teeth, I think it adds personality to a person's vibe and overall look and aesthetic. Or people who do facial modifications, I find that really interesting. Everyone sees themselves differently, and it's this self-journey of discovery that you have to go through on your own, and it's certainly a journey that, for me, took a while.
The culture commands us to love thyself, but demands that we look a certain way while doing so. God forbid you leave home without good vibes, worn with effortless confidence. We can love ourselves so long as those selves aren't anything short of society's expectations. We may have rejected the narrative that fair and petite is the ideal, but we've simply replaced it with another about looking fit and strong. If you're larger than model size, every image of you must scream body positivity. If you're tan or dark-skinned, you'd better be Beyoncé beautiful. The pressure to conform remains.
With me, my personal experience with makeup is growing up as a kid, I had major acne issues, right? Because I've got oily skin, and coming to Singapore, my skin never got used to the humid weather here. So I break out so easily, and it's so bad that I'm on medication to keep it in control, right? And being brown skin, every acne scar you get turns into a hyperpigmentation of a dark scar. That takes a long time to go away, right? Unless you're rich and you can do chemical peels and dermabrasions all the time, which I can't. So the first time I wore foundation, I was like, oh wow, this is kind of what I would look like with perfect skin. It's not perfect, but it was a lot better. And I felt good about myself, right? And that's what's nice about makeup. It makes you feel good about yourself.
You know what feels good? Being able to assert control over your circumstances, to modify what you don't like about yourself into something you can accept, or to highlight what you do like and enhance it. But makeup cannot change your DNA, fix your bone structure, wash your skin white. So to truly feel great in our own skin, we need to revise our understanding of beauty.
Because I explained to you, in my younger years, I was uncomfortable in my skin because of the color of my skin, because I felt like the color of my skin was putting me at a disadvantage, or I was seen as unattractive, right? But I learned to like it. I won't even say settle, because it's not settle. I want to be clear and say, I didn't settle and be this is my skin. No, I like my skin. My skin is the color of the earth. The skin is beautiful. Brown skin is beautiful. Islander people are beautiful, the way they look. This is gonna just sound like such a cheesy PR answer, but I love that it's so diverse. I love that every single person looks different.
Is different beautiful? Sure, we say that everybody is unique and beautiful in their own way, but how many of us actually internalize these feelings? don't we still have a gut reaction to a certain ideal we've been socialized to believe is more beautiful than the rest? Today, we've reached the height of the no makeup self-love movement. What's most punishing in all this momentum is that it swings round to the very people who wish to champion diversity and inclusiveness. If you admit that your personal beauty standards are in conflict with your values, you will not be tolerated. Feeling insecure about your own looks is deemed unattractive and worse, unempowering. But aren't these feelings valid? All they really reflect is that you're human. So I'm appealing to you not to beat yourself up for feeling bad about the way you look on a certain day, or maybe fixating on a specific physical flaw you have. I think it's perfectly okay to not feel great about yourself all the time.
I think that that's something that maybe I can relate to. You know, I'm in a business of making people look good, right? But my bare skin is like not so great, right? How do I get people to trust me that I can make them look good if I don't look good, right? And so, okay, for the sake of work, I put it on. But I'm so used to putting a layer of foundation on my skin. And would I go barefaced in front of a complete stranger? I don't know. I'm not sure. With my friends, yeah, sure. They know me, flaws and all, pimples and all, right? But with a complete stranger, no, because then you feel unattractive. And it's something I had to learn to acknowledge. And I'm just like, you know what, you gotta like me for everything, like pimples and all.
When we acknowledge our physical flaws and not try to erase them, we can allow ourselves to be imperfect and to see past these flaws. And then we start to realize that others see past them too. Ultimately, the hope is to get to a place where we feel empowered enough to expect others to see past the pimples and the chickenpox and the implicit biases. Do you have some physical insecurity that feels silly to admit to? I'm with you. We can be lame together. Don't worry about it. Really, Chris thinks you look great. I think you do too. Thanks for listening. And once again, thanks to the lovely Christian Maranyan for speaking to me for this episode. You can find all his amazing editorial work on Instagram at _XTIANO_. Too many underscores, Chris. Sound design for this podcast was by Lee Jaron.